Okay, everyone. Feel free to leave those skill issue comments below, as I'm going to politely complain about the challenge opponent for this video. However, here is the obligatory proof that I actually did, at least the normal variant, within a reasonable amount of time. While this video is meant to critique, get it, the encounter, I did like the unique approach that Rufo had, as she is similar to Wei and the Last Knight in terms of not just being a raw damage punching bag, but she actually has layers to her encounter, mainly in terms of status application. However, there were some aspects of her battle that I found to be quite a chore to interact with, namely the absurd amounts of protection she has, alongside the pace of the fight feeling incredibly slow. To start, let's at least discuss the parts in which I found to be enjoyable during the fight. First of all, Rufo does not simply play like a damage check and has multiple factors in regards to her performance during the fight. The emphasis on status type application on her second phase leaves the player to some variance on how to mitigate the absurd amounts of protection she has. Defensively, while she can forcefully apply status on her unbreakable coins, as well as her minions, the intricacies of her passive reminds me of Wei's encounter, where there is some degree of interaction if they attack people with statuses in regards to their passive, alongside management on which sinners attack which skills in order to trigger a specific interaction. Having 3 stacks of either color or one of each unique status leaves the sinner with Palette Vibrante, which, while leaving them vulnerable to sinking and bleed, does allow them to have some degree of damage mitigation on Rufo's Gloom critique, alongside halving the amount of Rouge or Bleu the next turn. Which means that having statuses on sinners is not just a binary of good if I have none, bad if I do. But it does allow some degree of response from the player if they notice that a sinner needs to cleanse these debuffs. That then means that this fight should be interactive, fair, and entertaining, like Wei was, right? Unfortunately, this fight does have some issues in regards to its execution. Sinking being an extremely oppressive status is among one of them. When the player uses sinking, the challenge is in applying a healthy amount of count and potency for consistent use. Rufo and her minions do not have this issue. Her minions have unbreakable coins that can supply count alongside Palette Vibrante, and Mauled Bleu, giving count and potency per turn. This is a recipe for your sinners to accumulate unsustainable levels of sinking, meaning that should you lose a clash, which is extremely possible even with 45 sanity due to her conditionals being easily met, your sinners can instantly corrode or panic. Offensively, she has a good set of tools to make you waste your turns, losing clashes by way of semi-forced sinking application, alongside easily fulfillable conditions which heavily swing the engagement in her favor. Defensively, she is a very frustrating encounter due to the nature of her fight that has heavy emphasis on protection. During the fight, she ties her protection to 4 minions, granting her a near permanent 80% damage reduction. Killing one of the minions means that the following turn will not have the 2 protection they provide until she is able to refresh her team using the critique skill. That being said, good luck trying to synchronize your kills, as every turn needs all 7 skill slots for you to defend yourself. I can see the gears turning in your head and deciding that bypassing the protection with status effects is an ideal strategy. However, good luck stacking status, as the first 2 attacks that hit her will be redirected to her minions. Mind you, that is 2 of the 3 skills that you can attack her with, as again, all 7 of your skills will be needed in every turn. Now, another strategy would be to stagger the minions to disable their ability to block, but she can also unstagger these units as well. Granted, she has a turn where she targets all 7 of your sinners, which means that you can attack her 5 times during that turn. The problem is this phase, unless done in a specific manner, takes time. And if you are doing the reflection game mode, that's time you do not have, with its difficulty artificially increased by the large amount of health she gets in that game mode. What it then feels like is that the challenge in this game mode is not in deciphering the required solutions to a puzzle. It is in the numerical increases of some of her passives and her massive health pool. You start the fight with 0 sanity, leaving room for opponents to apply sinking or a negative status that then empowers all of them the next turn. Any attack you do feels inconsequential, as it is either absorbed by another unit or just reduced to insignificant levels with 8 protection. Then, the entire time you're in a rush to kill all 4 of her minions before her critique brings them back. There is no method in which you can pick and choose which target to prioritize, as all 7 of your skills are constantly needed to clash against your opponents. Though it is to be argued that you can use the reflection system to its advantage, by clearing the first phase recklessly and taking damage, to then reset your units for the second phase. Although the solution is still not ideal with the oppressive nature of sinking, basically burning the first 12 turns you had. It just feels like a massive waste of time that again you do not have just to progress to the second phase. Not that the second phase is any more reasonable. She now has a semi-permanent 10 protection that can be reduced by 1, down from 2 from the original fight, for every negative status type applied on her. This extends past the usual 5, as binds, attack downs, and fragile count alongside the unique statuses like lodged arrows will count towards this. She also gets a multi-attack weight attack that if you win removes all her protection and applies 2 fragile down the next turn. Lose the clash on that and your team basically dies. Meaning that you have to use one of your strongest attacks just to repel this nuke, just for the next turn to finally allow you to deal damage. Which arguably won't feel as good, as you just had to prematurely use your strongest attack, which again, thanks to the 10 protection she has, will deal minuscule damage just to have access to this turn, leaving you with obviously weaker DPS choices. Therefore, your team will have to try to bend over backwards to reduce the protection just to deal damage outside of this phase. And before you say it, the method of using statuses to bypass protection is also mitigated, as it has a cap on potency and count. Bleed is somewhat unsustainable as all her attacks have unbreakable coins, which effectively will eat the count. Tremor is useless as she has no stagger threshold past this point. Rupture is adequate, as long as your composition actually retains count. Burn is not recommended, as aside from the cap of 30 potency, you are also again limited in turns, leaving the total possible damage to be approximately 360. The only recommended status is sinking, as her panic gives too fragile alongside her being weak to gloom damage. However, the status in which you choose to apply is not really the main issue. The main problem is the reoccurring pattern of 3 turns on and 1 turn off in terms of her protection. The entire fight just feels frustrating as you are on a strict schedule, but for every 3 turns of your 12 turn limit, your opponent is effectively immortal. And then on top of the very slow pacing of this fight, you are also contending with the limited degree of expression you have during this challenge. The decision to enforce a mandatory 12 center deployment is questionable at best and downright detrimental to gameplay at its worst. The strict 12 turn limit prevents it from being a protracted battle, which means any player actually giving a good attempt will have it in their best interests to constantly have the sinners win clashes in order to do the most damage per turn. Exploring the idea of needing to use all 12 of the sinners is counterintuitive, as again, the fight concludes in 12 turns. And no, the so-called options taken away from having 6 out of the 7 sinners, is not just to abuse evade. There are many IDs that gain extremely beneficial advantages should they have an extra skill slot. She-Faust is useful against her because she can apply the Lodged Arrow status effect, which qualifies as a permanent debuff on her second phase. This applies 1 to 2 fragile and removes 2 to 4 protection, depending on which version of her you fight, based on how many Lodged Arrows you have applied on your opponent. But she is heavily shackled by the limitations of her kit, requiring a staggering 8 turns for the expenditure of all 4 arrows. Giving her an extra skill slot would cut the setup in half to 4 turns, which means that the rest of the 8 turns can actually be spent fighting Rufo, instead of spending 8 turns with a sinner that is unable to clash or deal meaningful damage. The one time she can actually be useful, and the game just says no due to this mandatory rule. The forced rotation of the teams makes no sense as well. The boss needs setup in order for them to be weakened, but having the fight reset every 12 turns is detrimental, as it basically cleanses the statuses on the enemy and at the same time eliminates the team of 12 you were using prior. This means investing in 3 teams of specific and powerful sinners is required, again for seemingly no good reason. Don't get me wrong though, the fight and concept of this challenge mode as a whole is still a great idea. The boss and the concept of this challenge as individuals are great. I do like that it's not just a damage check and the main strategy is outside just dealing raw damage but in status application. But the execution of the game mode and the selected boss in this challenge, however, leaves some to be desired. My biggest suggestion is to just remove the 12 sinner requirement and ban the units that actually showed up on the field during this encounter. Also, enabling support units to share would be nice, as having 26 Uptie Ford level 60 IDs is once again very expensive. I do understand that this occurs at a very late part of the game, but it's still quite the investment. I do believe this mode has promised to be a very entertaining addition to the main game, but as it stands right now, I feel that it's giving more frustration than a genuine challenge. And believe me, I like challenge in this game, as seen with my LCB only runs. But this challenge has its difficulty created rather artificially with unreasonable amounts of protection, counterintuitive mechanics, and overall expensive solutions, rather than a genuine effort of problem solving and application of knowledge within this game. Then again, this is just my opinion on this. I wasn't cool enough to have gotten through the hard version within the allotted turn count, so maybe it is a skill issue. I do believe that this game mode has promise of being an entertaining weekly challenge, so long as the player actually has room to strategize and engage with this content through multiple methods and not just a very rigid set of rules. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to drink plenty of water.